They said it never mattered if he was white or black on that stage. What mattered was that he was, first, a black man, and second, a gay black man, two taboos stacked on the same fragile body. Yet somehow he was believed to have cut straight through all of that, refused to flinch, and still walked out under the lights to deliver a show people talked about for days. One friend once described his presence as Billie Holiday and Diana Ross on LSD. But even in a scene full of wild spirits, Sylvester still stood out. Within the comps, it was quietly agreed that he might have been the most gifted one there. When he opened his mouth to sing, the noise stopped. Heads turned. Rooms shifted. Most of the world remembers Sylvester as the disco queen, a sequined blaze of freedom, a living banner for queer people who had nothing else. What very few outside his inner circle ever heard about was what surfaced as he approached the end. Before dying of AIDS in 1988, he was said to have left behind a private list, 5 names written in determined ink. They were all black queer artists, men whose songs he once adored, whose photos he had once kept, who, in his eyes, had wounded him in ways that never really healed. These weren't just ex-lovers or casual admirers. According to people close to him, they were famous faces hiding in plain sight, building careers by stepping carefully around the truth, denying what they were, and in doing so, denying him. Why did Sylvester carry that bitterness like a hidden scar all the way to his last breath? And who was the so-called angel who, it was said, once left him crying alone backstage? The answers, people later claimed, were buried in his final notebooks, in a section he titled His Last Records. One name came first: Luther Vandross, the Angel, and the Cruel Rejection. In the black music world of the 1,970 seconds and 80 seconds, if Sylvester was the roaring fire of sexual freedom and on-stage rebellion, Luther Vandross was the cool current, flowing quietly alongside. Luther embodied slow ballads, silk-smooth arrangements, and the public image of a reserved, well-mannered gentleman. On paper, they looked like opposites that would never touch. Yet for a short time they shared the same air, the same stages, and, it was said, the same complicated space between admiration and resentment. The story often begins in New York, summer of 1978. Leviticus, a small lounge on West 57th Street, was packed tight, the room smoky and humid with spilled drinks and body heat. Luther was the announced headliner that night. Sylvester, according to eyewitnesses, slipped in as a surprise closing act. Luther had just left the stage, dressed in a brown velvet suit that caught the dim light in soft waves. His eyes, hidden behind deep red frames, scanned the crowd from behind the curtain as the applause rolled over him like a warm tide. Then the room shifted. Sylvester walked out. His afro rose like a crown, his silver jumpsuit burst under the spotlights, and the blood-red lipstick on his mouth turned every word into a slash of color. He stepped forward not like a guest, but like an uncrowned queen reclaiming her throne. No one knows exactly what passed between them in that tight space behind the curtain. But years later, a dancer from that show recalled seeing Luther's lips curl into a faint, half-playful, half-warning smile as he supposedly muttered, "You look good. But here, let's not get too real." Whether those were the exact words or just the way people remembered them, the tone stayed the same, a soft compliment wrapped around a quiet boundary. What makes this story sting is that Sylvester truly admired Luther. He was believed to have once said that Luther's voice felt like velvet wrapped around his heart. But admiration turned sour, not because of any insult shouted in public, but because of something quieter: Luther's refusal to speak. Sylvester was out there naming everything, saying he was gay, saying he was HIV positive, saying he was a black man who refused to lower his eyes for anyone. Luther, by contrast, stayed carefully silent. On that, Sylvester could not forgive him. In September 1982, after learning he was HIV positive, Sylvester did not retreat. Instead, he moved. He began organizing a gala night in San Francisco to raise money for uninsured black AIDS patients at a time when the disease was treated like a curse that no one dared mention. When most of America turned its face away, only the truly fearless stepped toward the fire. The very first name Sylvester wanted on the guest list was Luther's. It wasn't just the voice he wanted. It was the weight of the name, the power it carried with black audiences and the mainstream alike. The answer came back through intermediaries, sharp and cold. Luther would not be attending. The message passed along by his representatives was simple and final. He doesn't want to be associated with a movement. No follow-up, no softening explanation, just a door quietly shut. Those who knew Sylvester said he didn't scream or throw furniture. Instead, he walked to the window of his apartment on Castro Street and stared out at the streetlights, blinking through San Francisco's heavy fog, each pulse of light fading in and out like a weak heartbeat. Then, in a sudden burst, he smashed a mirror, shards jumping across the floor like frozen sparks. After that, he took his pen and drew a thick red line through Luther's name on the guest list. From that night on, Luther's name stopped being just a person. It turned into an emblem of everything Sylvester claimed to despise. Pretending not to see, pretending not to hear, pretending not to know, pretending to be the right kind of man, pretending not to understand that he, too, was part of the same community Sylvester was bleeding for in public. The distance between them only grew. Backstage at the Soul Train Music Awards in 1985, under harsh stage lights and clouds of synthetic smoke, it was rumored that Luther, upon catching sight of Sylvester, leaned toward a friend and joked, "An unemployed drag queen looking for attention." The remark was never confirmed, but the whispers spread through dressing rooms and corridors like smoke under a locked door. True or not, the story cut deeper into a rift that had already begun to feel permanent. 2 years later, in 1987, Sylvester appeared on a small local radio show in Oakland. The host asked why so many prominent black artists seemed to look the other way when AIDS was devastating their own people. Sylvester paused, then answered slowly, his voice calm but icy. "Some people sing love songs to women every night, then hide in a bathroom to kiss a nameless dancer. And they hate me just because I don't hide it." He mentioned no names. He didn't need to. In certain circles, everyone understood who he might have been pointing to. The message wasn't about one man. It was about all of them, the ones who used the community in private while pretending, in public, to belong somewhere else. Before his death on the 16th of December, 1988, at San Francisco General Hospital, Sylvester was said to have filled a leather-bound notebook with his final reflections, notes, jotted memories, and a list his friends later called his Ledger of Ghosts. In those pages, according to those who claim to have seen them, he wrote one sentence that still haunts anyone who repeats it. He had the chance to break the wall. Instead, he added more bricks. Beneath that line, a title ran across the page in heavy ink: "The Ones I Will Never Forgive." The first name, circled so hard the paper nearly tore, was just one word: Luther. If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments. We'd like to explore their journey as well. Billy Preston, the organ prodigy once hailed as gospel's golden child, drifted in and out of Sylvester's orbit like a strange, dark comet. On the surface, he was the vision of a church-bred messenger. Soft afro, gentle smile, the air of a man touched by God. He dazzled Western audiences alongside the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, moving fluently between sacred choirs and rock arenas. But among many black artists, his presence produced a complicated reaction, a mix of awe and unease. It was said that Sylvester, the brazen gay disco icon, privately called Billy the most frightening hypocrite I ever met. They were never friends, not even close. Yet in the early 1982, their paths kept intersecting at tribute shows for soul and gospel held across California's black communities. One night, Aretha Franklin headlined. Billy was on organ, fingers gliding like a sermon turned into sound. Sylvester appeared as the queer crossover attraction, the glittering echo of a new era. On stage, everything looked seamless. Polished smiles, shared applause, a smooth passing of the mic. Off stage, it was different. Glances slid away. Greetings felt hollow, rehearsed. Between Billy and Sylvester lay an unspoken history, a silent chain of contempt that no one talked about openly but everyone felt in the room. According to those who knew them, Sylvester's hatred wasn't born from just one injury. It formed slowly, like a necklace strung from a series of sharp, broken pieces. One of those pieces, people later recounted, appeared in 1982 behind a Pentecostal church in Oakland. Sylvester was passing through the parking lot when he reportedly saw Billy Preston standing in the shadows. The dark-skinned musician, clothed in an angelic white clerical robe, was said to be whispering suggestively to a young boy believed to be under 18. Sylvester didn't shout. He didn't intervene. Witnesses said he simply stopped, stared for a long, frozen minute, his expression turning to ice, and then walked away. But in that quiet moment, a permanent mark of disgust settled in his chest. In his mind, this was a man living two lives, holding up God like a shield while hiding behavior Sylvester could never accept. The damage deepened soon after. That same year, Billy reportedly approached Sylvester's partner at the time, a young bassist named Rico, during rehearsals for a charity show. In a low voice, he invited Rico to his studio to work on some music. It sounded harmless, even flattering. Weeks later, Rico vanished from Sylvester's world without explanation, no goodbye, no argument, nothing. Just silence. For Sylvester, it wasn't just a lover gone missing. It felt like being robbed in a room you never thought the thief could enter. Someone he never trusted, but never expected to come that close, had allegedly slipped into his private life and upended it. From that point on, whenever people in the soul and gospel circuit praised Billy Preston as a gifted, spirit-filled musician, Sylvester responded with a coldness that made rooms go quiet. Sometimes he openly mocked him. Other times he simply went still, jaw clenched, eyes distant. Officially, the rumors swirling around Billy stayed rumors. No headlines, no trials, no public consequences. Then, in 1991, long after Sylvester's death, Billy was actually arrested in Los Angeles for public same-sex activity. The arrest was recorded, but the reaction was nearly silent. No front-page outrage, no televised apologies, no statements crafted by publicists. It all seemed to be swept into a quiet corner and handled out of sight. Later, a leaked court file was said to have revealed that Billy had once been under investigation in a minor male prostitution case. He was never charged. Key witnesses reportedly withdrew without explanation, and the story faded before the public even had time to process it. For many, it became just another buried file in a system built to forget. For Sylvester, had he been alive to see it, none of it would have been enough. He was believed to have told someone close to him that men like Billy were the reason people despised gay black men, not because they existed, but because they refused to live honestly. In Sylvester's view, they played both sides, preaching purity by day, then moving through the shadows at night, guarded by secrecy and power. Sylvester, who walked the streets in dresses, full makeup, and sang openly about loving men, saw Billy's double life as poisonous. In his mind, Billy painted himself as a holy vessel while trampling on the very community he quietly belonged to. The industry, always hungry for harmony, occasionally tried to stitch them together. A music director in Los Angeles once planned a special event in 1984 and floated the idea of having Billy Preston and Sylvester share the same stage. Sylvester's answer, according to those present, was immediate and final. "I won't stand on a stage with a man whose hands are dirty," he said. It was only one refusal, one canceled idea, but it felt like a slap across the entire soul music world. Everyone knew Billy wasn't just another organist. He was gospel's crossover darling, the prodigy who had once been invited into Beatles sessions. Turning down a joint performance with him was like refusing a blessing from the establishment. And yet Sylvester did it without hesitation. Talent, in his eyes, couldn't wash away what he saw as a stained soul. Billy's life after that slid slowly downward. He fought alcoholism. His finances crumbled. He drifted away from both the gospel community that had once celebrated him and the pop world that had claimed him as a rare gem. He still appeared on stages here and there, but the glow was gone. Invitations became sporadic. Eventually, his name started to feel like a delicate object no one wanted to touch. In 2006, Billy Preston died after a long hospital stay and a devastating vegetative state brought on by liver failure and complications from diabetes. There were tributes, of course, from those who loved his music. But from Sylvester, who had already been gone nearly 2 decades, there was nothing, no letter, no taped message, no posthumous reconciliation. Those who had known Sylvester said that, after 1985, whenever someone mentioned Billy's name, he would just let out a thin, bitter smirk and change the subject. The rage that once burned hot had cooled into something sharper. Contempt without words. Billy, to Sylvester, had become less a person and more an emblem, a symbol of everything broken inside the black queer artist world. Hypocrisy, fear of living truthfully, the reflex to hide behind religion while denying desire. Billy Preston and Sylvester were two extraordinary talents, two conflicting worlds, locked in one long, unspoken feud. One wore a mask polished by churches and record labels. The other screamed his truth in sequins and eyeliner. In the end, both men were swallowed by storms of judgment and the punishing cost of being different in a world that demanded they choose one narrow path. What remains now is not reconciliation, not a public apology, not a neat ending, only the long, cold silence draped over the years. That silence may be the clearest proof of a confrontation that was never fully acknowledged, never fully explained, and never fully told, until now. If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments. We'd like to explore their journey as well. Teddy Pendergrass, the voice like warm honey, the eyes that smoldered, the body carved like stone, was sold to America as the ultimate lover boy of soul. In the late 1970 seconds, he became the fantasy made flesh. His concerts overflowed with black women pressed shoulder to shoulder at the foot of the stage, losing themselves under the spotlight. They screamed his name, tore off their bras, sobbed, trembled, and hurled phone numbers toward him as if he were some divine answer to their loneliness. But while the women in the front rows worshipped Teddy, many black gay men, especially the midnight queens like Sylvester, watched from the shadows with a different kind of knowing. They smirked because, according to countless whispered stories, they believed something the tabloids never printed. Teddy Pendergrass was not a man devoted only to women. Sylvester had a nickname for him, the Spotlight Thief. And that, some said, was the kindest thing he ever called Teddy. Behind the curtains of community soul concerts in Philadelphia in 1979, where their names sometimes shared the same bill, Sylvester sensed it immediately. Teddy wasn't just another singer competing for applause. To Sylvester, he was the living emblem of the hypocrisy he hated most. While Sylvester was battling for the right to appear in dresses, lipstick, and to sing openly about loving men, Teddy was being sculpted by producers into the picture-perfect straight idol, strong, smoldering, endlessly desired by women. Yet the queer community in Philadelphia, especially those who haunted certain bars and clubs after midnight, claimed they knew a different Teddy. Rumors placed him as a regular at underground bars for gay men, the kind of places where famous faces never used the main entrance. They arrived through the back door and left the same way, like ghosts. One humid night in early July 1981, at a spot called the Black Orchid Lounge in the Adams-Morgan neighborhood of Washington, D.C., Teddy Pendergrass was reportedly seen leaving the VIP room around 2 a.m. Witnesses recalled an unfinished glass of cognac hanging from his hand. On his arm, they said, was a tall, light brown-skinned young man known in that circuit as Little D. It might have been just another late-night scene, the kind that disappears by morning, if Teddy hadn't been so recognizable. Bartenders there were said to have a private nickname for him, Mr. Muscle Moan. They claimed he'd call young servers over, grip their wrists with that performer's confidence, and murmur, "You want to know why women lose their minds when I moan?" It was bold, crude, and for many of them, unsettlingly effective, especially coming from a man whose posters plastered bedroom walls, chest gleaming, shirt half open, muscles oiled and posed. Sylvester heard these stories in detail, city to city, hallway to hallway. Each new account reportedly made his blood run hotter. To him, Teddy symbolized an entire system that pushed people like Sylvester to the bottom while elevating men who hid in the shadows. Straight men get sculpted, Sylvester once muttered backstage when Teddy's name floated through the room. "Queers like me get stomped." Then, on the 18th of March 1982, everything blew open. That night on Lincoln Drive in the Germantown section of Philadelphia, Teddy Pendergrass's Rolls-Royce slammed into a steel guardrail with brutal force. The news bulletins hit the airwaves in a rush. Headlines screamed about the accident, the star at the wheel, the sudden tragedy. The driver was Teddy Pendergrass. The passenger, pulled from the wreck first, was a transgender model named Tanika Watson, 31 at the time. That detail could not be easily erased. Tanika had a legal name, modeling credits, and a history of performing in underground shows for trans women in New York. Within 48 hours, her identity was circulating in whispers, then in papers, then in the nervous language of scandal. The carefully crafted image Teddy had worn, the perfect man, the ultimate black women's fantasy, cracked like glass. Some fans were shocked. Others said they had always suspected something more, lurked beneath the silk shirts and choreographed moans. Sylvester did not go on television. He did not write any public statement. But a few months later, during an interview on a free-form Oakland radio station in June, he dropped a single line that hung in the air like smoke when asked about so-called straight men in the soul industry. "I once knew a voice sweet like honey," he said quietly. But behind the wheel, he was driving the truth straight to the dump. The host didn't push for details. He didn't need to. The queer community already understood who Sylvester was aiming at. Teddy's name had been all over the tabloids, entangled with sex, a wreck, a wheelchair, and a passenger. The public didn't know what to do with. On the night of the 18th of March, 1982, the crash left Teddy paralyzed from the chest down, ending the physical image he had built his career on, the prowling sex symbol who once had thousands of women shaking at his feet. But the real shock, to Sylvester and many in his world, wasn't just the crash itself. It was who had been in the car with him and what happened next. Tanika didn't run. She didn't vanish. She stayed at the scene, called 911, and, according to later accounts, tried to keep Teddy conscious until help arrived. Without her, he might not have survived long enough to face cameras again. But when Teddy reappeared in front of the press, when he told his tearful Back from the Brink story on national television, one detail was conspicuously absent. Tanika's name disappeared. Reporters referred to her simply as a female passenger. No thanks. No recognition. No acknowledgement that a black trans woman had been there, had helped save his life. Her existence was scrubbed from the official version, as if she were a shadow too inconvenient to mention. Sylvester never forgot that. He knew who Tanika was. He knew the circles she worked in, the shows where she performed, the people who knew her by name and history. To him, Teddy and his team's decision to erase her wasn't just strategic damage control. It was an erasure of identity, a denial of a life. All because that life did not fit the public's idea of the flawless straight hero. To Sylvester, that wasn't just hypocrisy. It was betrayal. It was an insult written in silence. It was, in his private language, a sin. Teddy survived the wreck, but at what cost? If survival meant cutting out the very person who stayed with him in the wreckage just to preserve an illusion, the illusion of the perfect straight man, then Sylvester wanted no part of that story. Sylvester, who lived his truth out loud and paid for it every single day, could not stomach anyone choosing the lie, especially when that lie erased a black trans woman. In his mind, that quiet omission was more violent than the crash itself. From then on, when Teddy's name was mentioned, Sylvester reportedly didn't rant or curse. He would just curl his lip into a thin line. He didn't have to insult him in public. The way he stared at a Teddy poster taped to a wall said everything. "If I had crashed with a drag queen in the car," he once told friends, "the press would have burned me alive." But Teddy? They gave him an award for surviving. Years later, after Sylvester found out he was HIV positive, Teddy's story still hovered over him like a bruise that never fully faded. In an unreleased audio recording that was said to circulate among a small circle, Sylvester brought up the crash again. His summary was simple, almost whispered. That was the day the world saw their hero was one of us. But instead of owning it, they buried it. And that's something I'll never forget. After the accident, Teddy Pendergrass continued to work. He recorded new albums, sat for TV interviews, and eventually stood, or rather, rolled back under the stage lights for a comeback performance in 2001. The public image around him shifted. The raw, erotic glow turned into a softer light sympathy, admiration for a man who had overcome. For most of the world, it became a neat redemption story. A fallen idol turned into a symbol of courage. But for the queer community, Sylvester spoke for the people who had watched their own kind die in secrecy and shame. It looked more like an expert cleanup job. The story was polished, the messy pieces swept out of sight. The late-night bars, the whispered nicknames, the trans woman who never got named. Sylvester died in 1988, taking with him a quiet, burning anger at a world that decided, case by case, who was allowed to live openly and who had to disappear behind a smile. Teddy lived until 2010, carrying in many people's eyes a secret everyone already knew, but no one in power wanted spoken out loud. Two men, two very different ways of walking through the same storm. One chose the spotlight fully exposed. The other tried to stand in the glare while hiding what stood just out of frame. The real difference, in the end, wasn't in their voices. It was in this: who dared to live their truth and who didn't. If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments. We'd like to explore their journey as well. Prince was unlike anyone else the American music machine had ever seen. From the moment he stepped onto the scene with wild curls, glossy lips, and sheer purple lace clinging to his body, people didn't know where to file him. Was he a man, a woman, gay, straight, something in between, something beyond? Every move he made seemed designed to challenge the rules about gender, sexuality, and art itself. And that was exactly what made the world fall at his feet. While mainstream crowds screamed his name and critics crowned him a boundary-breaking genius, there was someone watching from a distance with a very different feeling building inside. That someone was Sylvester. They never became friends. Their paths did not cross in dressing rooms with hugs or late-night studio sessions. But their worlds collided all the same. Both were black. Both were in love with soul, funk, and disco. Both played with gender on-stage eyeliner, ruffled shirts, heels, perfume, and fluid movements. Yet their realities could not have been more different. Sylvester lived openly as a gay man and drag queen, bearing the weight of that choice in public backlash, canceled appearances, and slurs shouted from dark corners. Prince, on the other hand, was ambiguous. Seductive, elusive. He never confirmed any label. He never denied any rumor. And the world rewarded him for that, praising him as a genderless genius instead of tearing him apart. The bitterness, people close to Sylvester said, started on a particular October night in 1981 at a club in San Francisco called Oasis. That evening, Sylvester was performing at a charity event for people affected by HIV long before the disease had a human face in the mainstream. The club was overflowing. Drag queens, trans women, queer youth, they crowded the Castro like pilgrims, seeking refuge in glitter and sound. In the shadows near the DJ booth, a man stood almost still, watching. Fedora tilted low, purple leather coat draped over his shoulders. He didn't sing, he didn't dance, he simply observed. Years later, a dancer named Luis would swear that man was Prince. He said Prince stayed in the dark, never pushing forward, never stepping backstage to introduce himself. Sylvester, according to that same dancer, saw him. Sylvester saw the way he watched, and he waited for a hello, for a handshake, for a nod of recognition between two black artists tearing at the borders of gender on stage. But nothing came. No greeting. No quiet moment of solidarity. At some point, the man simply slipped away, disappearing into the night as if he had never been there. After the show, backstage, Sylvester sipped bourbon in front of the mirror, eyes flat. Then he turned to a dancer and said, "Some people wear higher heels than me, but they're smaller than I'll ever be." That, according to those who heard it, was the seed of a resentment that would never fully die. Prince's rise only made it worse. His 1,981 album Controversy exploded, selling millions. MTV couldn't stop playing him. Critics praised him as the perfect fusion of masculine and feminine. He wore lingerie, high heels, and lace on stage, wrote songs hinting at dating versions of himself as a woman, slid between personas with ease. Women named him the sexiest man alive. Men studied him with a kind of fascinated confusion. Meanwhile, Sylvester, the one who had walked that tightrope long before, the one who had absorbed the slurs and the shut doors, watched as the world embraced a version of what he'd been punished for. Sylvester, the pioneer, was treated like a sideshow freak. Prince, the mysteriously unlabeled, was hailed as a cultural revolution. In 1984, already carrying the knowledge that he was HIV positive, Sylvester began working on a tribute project with a group of queer musicians. The idea was to honor those who had been taken by AIDS, especially within Black and queer communities. The title was Angels Wearing Lipstick. He wanted Black, gender-bending artists to contribute people who bent the rules like he did. The first name he reportedly wrote down was Prince. An invitation was sent through Warner Brothers. A week later, the response came back like ice water. Prince would not participate. According to people familiar with the exchange, the reason was simple. He did not want his name tied to any project that carried an overt LGBTQ+ message. The fallout was immediate in certain circles. Drag performers in New York started painting their faces like Prince on stage, only to tear the makeup off mid-show in rage and satire. A dancer from Prince's 1999 tour later claimed Prince once said, "I admire Sylvester, but I don't want people thinking I'm like him." To Sylvester, that line, whether perfectly accurate or passed along in whispers, was a blade. He had spent his life paying the highest price for being exactly what he was. Now, here was a man in eyeliner and high heels, using that image as an artistic weapon while refusing to stand with the very community that gave those symbols meaning. Sylvester began criticizing Prince more openly in small venues and off-the-record conversations. "Some folks pretend to be queer to sell records," he once remarked bitterly. "The rest of us got kicked out of our homes for being the real thing." It wasn't just jealousy. It was something more complicated, more painful. Sylvester had been banned from national TV for being too much, too flamboyant, too direct. Meanwhile, Prince pushed the visual boundaries even further and was crowned as a daring visionary. One was cast as a Black queer circus act. The other was framed as a boundary-breaking mastermind. On the 16th of December 1988, Sylvester died of AIDS. His funeral was small and mostly quiet close friends, a handful of queer artists, a scattering of people who had loved him when the industry did not. There were no cameras from major networks, no glossy tributes from big labels, no large-scale honors of what he had risked and achieved. There was no statement from Prince, no public condolences, no symbolic photograph posted in honor of the fallen queer pioneer. The silence felt like an echo of everything that had come before. A final, unsent acknowledgement from someone who had walked a similar path but never wanted to be linked to him. About 18 months later, Prince released The Ladder, a spiritual song about returning to the light after darkness. Some fans, especially within certain communities, quietly speculated that it might have been inspired in part by people like Sylvester, or by the losses swirling through the queer and Black worlds at the time. But, as always, Prince said nothing specific. He confirmed nothing. He denied nothing. And that, to many queer fans, was the core of the problem. Over the years, Prince deflected or sidestepped direct questions about sexuality, about LGBTQ+ people, about the deaths of artists who walked similar lines. He wanted the visual drama of dresses, eyeliner, high heels, and fluid movement. But he did not appear willing, at least publicly, to pay the same price others had paid for wearing those things in real life, offstage, without the safety of mystery. After Sylvester's funeral, a drag queen reportedly summed it up in one bitter line: "Prince wears dresses, but doesn't want to be called gay." So what are we? The ones who lived real and died real in his eyes? It was the kind of question Sylvester had carried, unspoken, until his final days. To him, Prince wasn't a fearless trailblazer. He was more like a performer on a high wire stretched between two worlds, close enough to benefit from both, but never fully committing to either. A tightrope walker, not a bridge, just near enough to the queer community to take inspiration, but never so near that he'd be forced to say, out loud, "I am one of them." Two legends, two parallel careers, one unresolved tension. In the story that Sylvester left behind, Prince wasn't just another icon. He was the ambiguous figure who refused to pick a side, and that, more than anything, was what Sylvester could never forgive. If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments. We'd like to explore their journey as well. Jermaine Stewart stepped into the 1,980 seconds music wave like a fresh breeze people didn't know they were waiting for. With his youthful, magnetic face, soft curls, and glowing skin, he looked like the poster child of the new funk pop age. His style walked a careful line: crop tops, silver hoop earrings, tall leather boots. Not fully masculine, not fully feminine, but an alluring in-between that felt both familiar and unreachable. True to the message of his 1986 breakout hit, "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off," Jermaine was embraced as a kind of wholesome antidote in an industry drowning in sexualized pop. Parents liked the song. Radio loved it. He became, on the surface, a clean, safe star. But behind lyrics about keeping your clothes on, there was, according to those who watched him closely, a mountain of fear, fear of truth, fear of exposure, fear of being seen as one of the people he quietly mirrored. That fear was precisely what turned Jermaine into a name. Sylvester, the boundary-smashing queer disco icon, could never bring himself to forgive. In 1984, both Jermaine and Sylvester joined the R&B Unity Tour, a traveling showcase meant to spotlight black funk and soul acts across the country. One night in San Jose, Sylvester set the stage on fire, leaving the crowd roaring and breathless. Backstage, when the lights dimmed and the smoke machines cooled, Jermaine came to greet him. A lighting technician named Troy later recalled how excited Sylvester was. He personally invited Jermaine to come into the studio to remix "Do You Wanna Funk?" In the cramped backstage area, they hugged, laughed, clinked plastic cups of champagne in front of a makeup mirror rimmed with harsh bulbs. To everyone in that room, it felt like history was about to be made, the original queer pioneer linking hands with a rising, androgynous star. One legend, one newcomer, a bridge between generations. But 3 days later, when Sylvester's manager picked up the phone to lock in the session, there was only empty ringing. No callback, no scheduling. A week after that, a quiet message arrived through Arista Records. "Jermaine is unavailable at this time." No reason. No personal word from Jermaine. No direct refusal, just a door closed without a sound. To Sylvester, that was worse than a simple no. It felt like being left to talk to a ghost. The final blow, for him, came soon after. In August 1984, during a private radio interview with Dutch DJ Peter Van Lee on Radio Veronica, Jermaine was asked about Sylvester. The program was intended for European listeners only, something that might never circle back to the artists themselves. Jermaine reportedly laughed lightly and said, "He was an icon. I won't deny that. But now he seems a little outdated. Funk needs something fresher than wigs and sequin dresses." The words were supposed to stay overseas, sealed inside a broadcast far from San Francisco. But someone taped the show. Somehow, a cassette copy traveled back across the ocean, slipping through hands until it landed in Sylvester's home. He listened. By the time the tape clicked to a stop, witnesses said the room felt colder. Sylvester hurled the cassette against the wall, shards of plastic skittering across the floor. Then, in a frightening echo of earlier betrayals, he slammed his fist into the mirror in his bedroom. Glass splintered, reflecting his face in a dozen jagged fragments. To him, Jermaine hadn't simply turned down a collaboration. He had mocked him, and he had done it safely to foreign radio for foreign ears, as if Sylvester would never hear about it. Sylvester had seen Jermaine as a potential heir, a younger brother in sequence who might carry the queer funk torch forward into a new era. Instead, he felt he'd been treated like a relic, something to praise in the past tense, then discard when the spotlight shifted. By the time Sylvester sat down to write his final thoughts, the sweetness of Jermaine's public image meant nothing to him. Behind closed doors, behind the soft curls and careful lyrics, Sylvester believed he saw something else. fear dressed up as charm, ambition wrapped in distance, and a willingness to step away from someone who had opened the door for him first. That is why, according to those who claim to have seen the leather-bound notebook he left behind, Jermaine Stewart's name eventually joined the others on that hidden list, the 5 black queer artists who had hurt him too deeply to ever be forgiven. 5 men. 5 different forms of silence, denial, or betrayal. One dying disco queen who remembered every slight. Everyone knows the public story, the hits, the outfits, the charts, the scandals carefully rewritten and half forgotten. But in the shadows of Sylvester's final days, another record played. A private inventory of wounds, written in his own hand, naming those who, in his view, chose fear over truth when it mattered most. And somewhere near the bottom of that list, in writing that still cut deep, was the entry that turned a sweet-faced prince of funk into a permanent ghost in Sylvester's personal history. Jermaine Stewart. Sweet, smiling, shining. And, in Sylvester's eyes, the quiet backstage double dealer. If you know someone whose life or personality